Welcome to the Retail is Detail podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Hamer. This is where we go beyond the headlines and get into how great leaders, operators, and innovators in retail really think. From building teams, scaling businesses, to loyalty and data. Every week I talk to the people building and running and reinventing retail. Unpacking what's working, what's changing, and what's next. If you care about the detail of retail, you're in the right place.
My guest today hated the cold, then broke into at Hampstead Heath Pond at midnight during lockdown and nearly made herself ill, and then decided to build the world's first smart ice bar. She's raised 2.8 million, got Anthony Joshua and James Watts in her corner, and is charging nearly $6,000 for a tub of cold water. Laura Fullerton, welcome to the Retail is Detail podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So you hated the cold previously, you nearly got sick from contaminated water, and then you decided to build a £6,000 smart ice bath, whereas most people would have bought a space heater, I assume. Where did that leap come from?
It came from my first ice bath experience, which I absolutely did not want to do. I thought I'd make an excuse to run to the bathroom when everyone else was getting in, but I got bullied into doing it. And honestly, the experience was horrific. I didn't enjoy it. But afterwards, a few hours later, I remember thinking, why do I feel so good? And I just had this amazing clarity. And at the time, I was a stressed out founder. I was running my second startup, and it was just like pressing the reset button. So while I didn't like the cold, I loved what it gave me.
Okay. And has that continued? Have you got that every time you've taken an ice bath from then until now?
I get something different every time. But yes, the benefits compound as well. And yeah, I fell in love with it. And the reason I ended up breaking into Hampstead Heath Ponds at night during lockdown was that it just became very hard to try and get my cold fix. I bought so many bags of ice, put into my bath at home. I jumped into frozen over lakes, horse troughs, all sorts, because some of the products on the market started at £12,000 and they were huge and quite ugly. Or you've got little inflatables that get dirty very quickly and just break. So yeah, I actually found a private Facebook group, which at the time had 6,000 people in, which I thought was a lot. There's now around 60,000 people in this group just learning how to transform a chest freezer into your own DIY ice bath. And so that for me was the moment where I thought, well, there's something bigger here. If there's this many people willing to get electrocuted, there's something not meeting their needs. So I decided to create it.
Really cool. And why midnight? Why couldn't you do that at a more reasonable hour?
I think because, there would have been people around. And the real answer is that it was after a bottle of wine.
Appreciate that. So look, taking a step back. So you started your career writing copy at Saatchi & Saatchi, which is a long way from being a hardware founder.
Yes.
Was that creative background? How much of an advantage was that? And then conversely, how hard has it made the operational bits of building Monk by comparison?
Yeah, I think my background is what has allowed Monk to become what it is. Like, we continuously hear it that the brand is almost stronger than the product right now, being very early stage. And yeah, my branding background has really helped that. I've just always been obsessed with consumer brands. So that's been very helpful. But yes, when it comes to building connected hardware, so it's not just hardware, but it's software and firmware that all has to talk to each other, it did not help me at all. So that has been a monumental learning curve. And I approached it thinking, well, how hard can it be? And it turns out it can actually be quite hard.
Yeah, famously so.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you described Monk as your third business. So you had Fitty, and then a venture under NDA, and now this. By the time you got to Monk, what did you already know about yourself as a founder that you didn't know at the start?
Ooh, very good question. I would say I learned that I was very resilient, which I think all founders have to be, because it's like getting in a boxing ring. You're just continuously getting punched and you've got to stand up and continue fighting. I definitely learned a lot about my skills. As we've touched on, it's not just branding and creating that. I have a lot of other skills as well, but I knew that I'd never built a business at this scale before. And I was coming into it as a solo founder, which I never wanted to be. I would have loved to have had a co-founder, someone who particularly had expertise in hardware. But I just didn't find anyone. So from day one, I made sure that I set myself up with really good board and advisors around me who could add to where I backed in terms of strengths.
Yeah, and do you have that hardware specialist now? And if so, how do you
Yes.
find that person?
Yeah, we found a couple of really good product people. And it was difficult. When we first started, we actually had third-party hardware team, or we had a hardware team and a firmware team. For reasons at the time, it made sense to separate the two. And when we were bringing our first product to market, we had a lot of issues with it. And what was difficult was actually the integration of the firmware and the hardware. And when you have two distinct teams, it's very easy for them to point the finger. And so eventually we got to the phase where we managed to bring in our own CTO in-house, which was great because he's got a lot of experience across connected products. So that was a really great changing point. And also, it's very common that startups start that way and, eventually kind of bring that resource in-house. That was a really great turning point. It was very painful getting there. But yeah, we've also got, as well as like in the internal team, we also have some brilliant product hardware, like scaling specialists around us as well.
I think we're fairly familiar with what the hardware means in this case, but what do you mean when you say firmware?
Yeah, so we created the first smart ice bath because one of the problems we found is that people really don't know how to use cold water therapy safely or effectively. If you were using it for mental health and someone else is using it as an athlete after they're competing, you'd use it in a really different way. And so what we set out to create was, it's a bit like, you can compare it to Peloton. If you've got a stationary bike and a Peloton, you've got the instructors and the music, and it's a really different experience. So we've essentially recreated that. So within our app, you can have guided plunges. So there's a program for mental health. There's one for muscle recovery. And imagine if you're in the ice bath and it's saying, right, you're 30 seconds in, this is what's happening in your body. And so that one is involved in an acclimatization program, which teaches a complete beginner how to use it. So it just gives you the confidence, the coaching that you're doing it right. And then another thing that the app does is you can control the baths, you can set schedules and time and temperature. So that's where the firmware comes in. So it actually allows us to control all the various elements of the bath itself, of the hardware. And then the third thing we do is we integrate with wearables like Whoop and Aura. There's about 16 we integrate with at the moment. So we're actually pulling through that data so you can see how it impacts things like sleep and HRV over time. So you can actually prove that it works.
Very, very cool. Let's talk Fiddy briefly. So that was a health and fitness subscription box that you bootstrapped and exited. It must have been an interesting time because subscription boxes were really a thing, and then they very suddenly weren't. What did that teach you about resilience and founding?
That was probably the greatest learning curve because I had absolutely no idea how to run a business. I was fresh out of advertising and just thought, see how it goes, and just managed to build it. And we proved that it worked as a model in the UK on a really small scale. It was never huge. And honestly, I had no idea how to scale it. And I got approached at the time by a guy who was based out in Toronto, and he ended up buying it. And we had a new plan. We changed the model slightly. It was going to become more personalized and scale it across North America. But what stopped us was COVID. So I think actually as a product, it would have sold incredibly well. Health and fitness products were just booming, but actually the model, you are completely reliant on your supply chain. We would feature maybe 8 to 12 brands each month, and so many of them would have ended up going out of business. And so we decided to pause on that, or he decided to pause on that. But it taught me a lot.
And so that being reliant on partnerships, which I guess you could say Monk is to an extent with the partnerships with wearables. Like, how do you view partnerships nowadays and supply chain that you might not have for that first venture?
Good question. So, do you know what? I think actually one of the things that the supply chain gave me that was more valuable was a network. Because when I then came around to create or work on previous businesses, I had this amazing contact book. If you think I was working with like 10 brands a month over a couple of years, the amount of fellow, founders I knew, it was amazing. And I think part of that is actually being able to then introduce people to other people and see their partnerships take off. I think that was probably the most rewarding thing that I learned about supply chain, because the supply chain for Monk is entirely different. And that's been a very interesting learning curve, because how we set up our product originally, over the last 6 to 8 months, we have completely rebuilt our supply chain. It's just incredibly different. I don't know that any learnings have necessarily transferred over.
Well, let's come on to the network. So you've raised 2.8 million as a solo female founder of a hardware startup, which must be hard. So what did that teach you about networking? How valuable is your network in that? And what did it teach you about how investors actually make decisions?
Oh gosh. Do you know that has been, I feel like I say this about everything, that's probably been one of the biggest learning curves, because I had no idea how to raise money. And I fortunately had a guy, Lee, who was helping me, and he was so influential in the early days of Monk, and his background was largely investment. And he helped me put the pitch deck together and figure out how we were going to approach this. And we just sat down one day and he was like, right, pitch me. And I had no idea how to frame anything. And it was the most grueling 5 minutes of my life. And even when I think about it now, it just brings up this feeling inside me. Oh, but I learned so much from that. And again, network was really helpful. If anyone in my LinkedIn network had investor in their title, they were probably going to get a message from me. And one of the things I learned quickly is ask for advice, you get investment. Ask for investment, you get advice. So I would just reach out to a couple of people and say like, hey, you're clearly influential in this world. Like, is there anyone you know that loves this space? And that was quite helpful for me. One thing that actually worked really well is just having a big name on board fairly early. Yeah. And I remember this was completely coincidental. I put up a picture of some of my favorite business books. It was on my Instagram and I was just tagging a couple of the authors, and I went to tag Brewdog because it was James's first book. I can't actually remember what it's called. It's somewhere on the shelf behind me. And it came up the suggestion, Brewdog James. I was like, oh, I guess that's the guy. And we essentially became friends. We built a relationship. He wanted help at the time with his health, and I wanted help with business. We were just swapping business for biohacking tips. And one day I told him about the idea for Monk, and before I could finish the sentence, he was like, do you need money? And so James became one of my first investors. And so when I could reach out to people and say, oh, look, this guy's on board, that just really helped. And honestly, you've got to be kind of savvy as a founder. I think it was before James committed, we were also talking to Anthony Joshua, and you could say to them like, oh, I say to AJ like, oh, James is really excited because he really loves boxing, and I'd say to James like, oh, AJ is really excited because AJ is actually a really savvy businessman. People see him as just an athlete, but this guy is so smart. And so you kind of have to slightly play them off against each other.
That helps to get both those deals done.
Yeah. And I think it was actually possibly easier raising that friends and family round when Monk was just a concept. Essentially, we didn't even have a picture of what it looked like. So we didn't know. We hadn't started product development. We hadn't done anything. It was just an idea on a piece of paper. But I think people really believe in you and your conviction. Whereas I think when we went to raise our seed, it was a little bit harder, because suddenly you've got some traction, but actually, you haven't done as much in, sales or revenue or X as you like, because you'd be constrained on that. So there's always like a bigger story to tell. But also timing wasn't necessarily in our favor. When we were raising our seed, it was, everyone was saying it was the worst climate it had been in 10 years. So it took us quite a long time to close that. But fundraising can be a beautiful and a brutal journey at the same time.
They say that you could have no revenue or you could have a lot of revenue, but having a little bit of revenue is the worst case scenario for funding. Is that what you found?
Yeah. It made it hard. But you've just closed a round, right?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. Yeah, we've raised sort of similar amounts on our journeys, but you're approaching another fundraise now. How are you approaching that differently this time?
So it feels like we've got a much tighter story now, because we have learned so many lessons. So I think the narrative is very different. And I think we've also got a lot of confidence in the business. We've proved a lot out. It definitely feels different. We're still targeting mainly individuals and family offices. I don't think this is a VC play yet. But yeah, it actually felt quite exciting before we went out with this raise. Often you think like, oh God, it's just going to be such a distraction. It's going to go on for so long.
How many meetings do you have to raise 2.8 million, and how many do you anticipate for this round?
Oh gosh, I looked at the sheet where I tracked all the conversations or investors I had, and I think to get that 2.8 million, I think there were like 300 different people on there. And bear in mind, they're only the ones I've tracked. Like there's so many no's you get to before you actually like log someone on a sheet. So yeah, a lot of people.
Okay. Yeah. Brace yourself.
Yeah.
So let's talk about branding and the positioning. So someone described Monk as the love child of Apple and Dyson, which you said made you incredibly happy. Yeah, looks like it. That kind of brand positioning doesn't happen by accident, though. So how deliberately did you engineer that?
Oh, very deliberately. I think we were really clear who our target audience would be from the very beginning when we were designing this product. It was never going to be the really cheap entry level. Our design ethos is to make wellness extraordinary. Because I, as someone who loves all kinds of health wellness, my life is very much biohacking and health optimization. I want products that are going to elevate that. I don't want to be going out and plunging in a wheelie bin, which I have done many times. I've spent many hours plunging in wheelie bins, but it doesn't really feel like a product that I want to use. I want to use products that say something about me and just make me feel good. For that reason, you've got to have a product that does have that premium positioning and brand. And yeah, again, coming from more of that consumer marketing, advertising, brand background, it's just, I don't know, it came very naturally.
Nice. That's a great tagline. I've got to ask while we're on it, what's the weirdest thing you've used for a cold plunge?
Probably the frozen horse water trough. Yeah. Yeah. It was actually also very small, and yeah, it was not a pleasant experience.
Okay. It's one more business stuff. So you obviously you mentioned the sort of hardware firmware relationship and how there are only a few examples out there, Peloton, Zwift in the market, that turn this hardware into an ongoing relationship. What does retention look like for that? Is it going now, and how does it looking? And at what point does the app become more valuable, or the firmware become more valuable than the bar?
Where we are now and where we want to be long term are two fairly different things. So right now we have started this with the hardware and the cold as our wedge, but really long term what we're trying to do is build the operating system for human resilience. Because I very much believe that the world has a nervous system problem: anxiety, burnout, poor sleep, chronic stress. These are all signs of the same thing, which is a nervous system that was never designed for the world we now live in. And cold exposure is actually one of the very few practices that actually reliably trains our stress response, improves resilience and clarity and performance under pressure. And so our role as Monk is to transform that into that desirable, repeatable daily ritual. But the cold is just one thing. You've also got breath work, you've got sauna and contrast therapy and so many other modalities. So we want to, over time, integrate them with our app as well. And we've had a lot of really interesting conversations with other companies. It could be sauna companies who also see that value in linking the physiology and behavior and recovery outcomes. And I think actually over time, you can use that to power really adaptive and guided personalized training across all these other modalities. So yeah, that's where we want to go long term. But right now, the hardware is very much the wedge. But it's interesting as well because our app is also what helps keep it sticky, because it's very easy for people to go and buy a product, especially like an ice bath. Let's be honest, it's not a pleasant experience, like getting in and freezing. You're doing something hard because you're going to come out the other side, feeling better. But it's a tough experience. So it's very easy to go, oh, you know what, I'll do it later today. And you just put it off. And suddenly it's there in your garden, just, collecting leaves. So yeah, the app is key to us.
Yeah, awesome. And obviously you're kind of, in selling a premium ice bath, you're somewhat preaching to the converted at the moment. Like people are already going to invest in, they already believe and have done their own research into biohacking. But how do you explain these concepts in simple terms to get someone who's initially not interested in this field?
I think, yeah, it's really interesting because we're not selling cold water. We're selling like the experience of who someone is going to become after. And I think that's why I love retail in a way, because I love the moment where someone experiences the product properly. And in our world, that is the first plunge. You can explain cold exposure and the benefits all day, but the second someone gets in, you see the shift. And that's the moment that retail really becomes real. So I don't know if that's the most concise answer.
No, sure. You got to try the product to understand the benefits and make it and have that moment of realization. And that brings us on nicely. So you're now targeting the luxury commercial space, so launching into Fairmont hotels. So when someone tries your product in a hotel versus buying it cold online, how different does that make that conversion journey? And how much have you seen, how much more they're willing to pay as a result?
Yeah. So the going into commercial spaces is fairly new for us. So to date, we've predominantly been about 95% D2C. So yeah, residential homes, but particularly with the new product that we bring out soon, it's more geared towards commercial spaces. And, we've seen it work for so many other companies like Peloton, and they almost act as showrooms. So it's somewhere people can go and try it. And then hopefully they continue or then buy it for their home, and we can set up, affiliate relationships with those kind of partners. But I think it's not just about acting as a showroom where people can see it, but you're almost borrowing their credibility and their trust. If you're in a really premium place, like we're speaking to Wentworth at the moment, they're redoing their club, and I think we're going to go in there. So that's just our ideal consumer.
Nice. Okay, so when we think about the long term, which channel into B2C and B2B through wellness spaces is more important to Monk?
I think it's going to be 50-50. I mean, that's the prediction at the moment. And it's actually really interesting because we're just going into production with our new product that is designed for commercial spaces as well as residential. So we're almost seeing the first batch as a bit of a trial run, which will hopefully give us some data as to what that split's going to be. Because, we can make predictions, but until you've actually got the product in market and, see how it performs. Yeah. But I think that's why it's really interesting. I think physical retail is going to become more important, not less, over time. I know we're living in an increasingly digital world, but especially for products like Monk, I think stores that only display products will, not that they'll die, I don't want to be too controversial and say that, but I think stores that create that kind of transformation, if you can go in, you can try out a sauna and try out a cold plunge. I think a lot of purely D2C brands will struggle because it's easy to over optimize for ads and actually underinvest in real world experiences, which arguably I think we all really appreciate and need more of. So I think the brands that win will be the ones that people can actually feel.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of online only brands converting to physical retail in a slightly surreal and countercultural shift. So in terms of the commercial aspect, what needed to be different in an ice bath? Why wouldn't your residential ice bath work for a commercial space?
A lot of it comes down to the power of the chiller. Especially in a lot of commercial spaces, you've got really high usage. You've got so many people jumping in and out that raises the water temperature. There's also elements of cleanliness as well. So you've got to have really powerful filtration. And in a lot of residential units, you might just have ozone and a filter, whereas actually in commercial units, maybe you need 2 or 3 stage filtration. Okay. And then there's also things like in a lot of commercial spaces, you might have it next to a sauna. And now we're starting to see commercial spaces really properly design this from the ground up. So they have, rooms and areas dedicated to this, but a lot of existing spaces are retrofitting it. So it's almost like, hey, we've got this cupboard under the stairs. We want to pop an ice bath in that. And they don't have proper ventilation. And so ice baths have to deal with a lot of external heat. So yeah, there's so many environmental factors that will affect its performance. Okay. Yeah, but I think we've got a really interesting price point as well, because a lot of commercial units really typically start at like 20K, which is a lot. Whereas our new product is going to be around 4.5.
Okay. So actually potentially a little bit cheaper than the residential units you're selling at the high end.
Yes, yeah. It is indeed. So we've expanded from having that single flagship, which is the £6,000 product, to having a 3-tier product family. So essentially it's that good, better, best strategy. So we also have an entry-level product, which is, I need to find a better way to describe it. When I say it's an inflatable, it makes it sound really cheap, but it's the same material you have, military grade life rafts out of, and that's £1,000. And then the one we're bringing in sits at what we think is a really interesting white space between 2,000 to 4,000, depending on which chiller you choose. Yeah. I think that is going to drive probably around 70% of our revenue going forwards.
Wow. And is that out in the market yet, or is that an upcoming?
Nearly, yeah. We're just building up the wait list at the moment, and the first units will be here in May, so very soon.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Now, your original wait list for the original product got to 3,000 people before it shipped, and that is a pretty rare level of pre-launch demand. So how did you build a list that big, and then what surprised you about who actually converted when the list went live?
So do you know what? I was talking to someone yesterday and they said their wait list was around 20,000 people. So I now feel like we had a really small wait list, but we did it with almost no advertising spend. I think we had a lot of ingredients work in our favor. I think the timing was great because everyone was just starting to talk about ice baths and cold exposure. We've come out the back end of COVID, where a lot of people had realized actually they're the ones in control of their health. And, Wim Hof was really exploding. So there were a lot of market conditions that worked really well. And honestly, the products that were on the market are all pretty ugly. They're just, big black bins, no disrespect to them. And I think Monk aesthetically it looked beautiful. We wanted to design something that would look beautiful in someone's home or someone's garden, as well as fitting in beautifully at a Soho house and these more premium environments.
Mm.
And so I think, a combination of the aesthetics, it was exciting. And with the smart integration, it was just a slightly new offering. And so we were fairly lucky to get a decent amount of coverage in the press. So that helped build the wait list. Instagram was fairly large for us. And I think also our positioning, we see the cold as being one really important modality in like the bigger holistic health space.
Mm-hmm.
And no one else really talks about any of the other modalities. I think having built up a good network, and I don't talk about myself as if I've built up a good reputation, but in the world of biohacking, it resonates, and people really understood what the brand stands for. And so, I think there are a few factors that helped us build up that wait list.
Cool. You're very welcome to big yourself up. So on that conversion, like who converted, what kind of people converted, what were the trends that surprised you?
So we did actually quite a lot of customer segmentation work, and we had 4 key audiences, and there was a 5th one that really surprised us. So the core ones we have are the biohackers, which is my kind of bread and butter. The people that really care about data, like that. The integrations with Whoop and Aura and the data side of things really appealed to them. We then had the aspirational athletes. So these are people that still have a full-time job, but they likely take all their holiday to go and do an Ironman in Portugal. Real fitness fanatics. You then have the high performers. So they're your founders, your execs, your C-suites, and a lot of our customers are the founders and CEOs of some of like the biggest companies in the UK. And there's quite a lot of overlap between these audiences. But one of the ones that really surprised us, which I didn't see, is a segment of slightly older, like I guess midlife women. So for a lot of them, they've raised their family, their children have left home, some of them have retired. Typically their husbands might run the family office, and it's their time to suddenly come back to themselves. Some of them have been through menopause, and actually they've discovered that cold water therapy really helps them. It's more like the mental and emotional benefits of it. And so that's been really, really interesting for us.
Nice. PR is a top one. I've always shied away from it personally, but I know it's important. How do you get great PR? How do you get in the press as a brand?
So in the early days, we worked with an agency, particularly one lady, Ellen, who was amazing. And before we even released a picture of Monk Look Like, we managed to get into Vogue, The Telegraph, and that was really surprising. Some of the other good PR we've got has been me reaching out to journalists. I think doing it as a founder gives you a slightly different angle. We have also learnt the hard way that not all agencies can deliver. We worked with one, and I think we spent 16K on them over a number of months, and we got hardly anything from it. So I think I'm not looking to work with another agency, but actually as part of the launch for our new product Cocoon, I am going to be trying to drive some press myself. So I'll keep you updated. I'll let you know how that goes.
Yeah, please, that'd be great.
Yeah. What's your experience been like with press?
Something I'm reluctantly getting into now, especially as we launch in a variety of different categories. I think as long as you write it for them and make it easy, that a lot of the trade press we go to is fairly open to it. But we need to do more. I mean, I think of like furniture and tools and the categories we're going into, they're actively looking for interesting stories that are a little bit outside the norms that helps us. So
it's a difficult one because it takes a lot of time, and it's potentially high impact, but fairly low probability. So you're kind of just rolling the dice, right?
Yeah. The funny thing is we closed our investment, featured in City AM, then we had a bunch of investment offers. Classic. Really could have used that a couple of months before.
She did pitch a journalist the other day. She'd written previously a lot about female founders fundraising, and everyone always talks about the same stats, that less than 2% of VC funding goes to females. But I thought, well, what if we did like a behind the scenes, like this is the day-to-day, this is what it actually takes to run a raise. But they haven't bitten yet. But my intention was, well, if people see that, then maybe I'll get some investment offers through that.
Yeah, that works out. That sounds potentially great. It's really hard to know what's going to come with this stuff.
Yeah.
So hardware is hard, right?
Yes.
And your timelines tripled, your cost doubled. Did you have a specific moment where you were really, really worried you might not get there? And what pulled you through?
Yeah, every day. No, there were definitely times when it just felt like, the wind could just blow in like a 2% different direction and that's it, you're done. I don't think a lot of people realize like the realities of building a startup, particularly in something like hardware where it's so capital intensive. Like when we were going through that first production run and we were having issues, it takes time and money to solve them, and we really had neither. We had customers who'd waited a year and a half, some of them, to get their product, and then to have to communicate delays while you're trying to work through issues. It was really, really challenging. And one of the things that actually really helped me, there's a book somewhere up there called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I don't know if you've read it, but it is a phenomenal book. So many times I will go back and read the chapter called The Struggle over and over, and somehow that just it makes me feel better, because it is hard. And I think that's also why I always say you've got to have three types of people around you in your network. You've got to have fellow founders they don't have to even be at the same stage as you. They can be in completely different industries, but people that are just also in the trenches. I think you've then got to have people who are about 5 years ahead of you, so they can shine the light. And it's so helpful on a really actionable basis. Like, for example, we wanted to get regulated so we can offer consumer finance because we needed to for a product as much as ours. And they can say, right, this is who you work with, this is the process. And then you've got to have almost like the stretch mentors, people that are wildly successful that kind of just give you hope and can introduce you to people. So I think throughout, when you're having those moments where you're like, how do we even pull through this? I think you need to be surrounded by those people.
Okay, cool. And how do you find stretch mentors?
Tag them on your Instagram posts. Yeah, I think, I think it all just, again, it just comes down to network. And, interestingly, you and I met at Baby Bathwater, which is, a members group. They hired out private islands I think it was somewhere in Greece, wasn't it? And it's like a 3-day, Croatia, that's the one. 3 days just with fellow entrepreneurs, people at all kinds of different levels. And it's places like that I think you build these relationships. And particularly when you go into them not needing anything or wanting anything, you're just genuinely building a friendship, and then when you need to call on someone, they're there.
Okay, cool. So go to Croatian islands with lots of other entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And all other things. So the Monk brand is very deeply Laura Fullerton at this point, right? It's about your biohacking. It's about people who are materially investing in you. How big would Monk have to get for it not to require Laura Fullerton?
I think it would be fairly easy to take me out of it. I always I know how powerful it is to do founder-led content and to put myself out there on Instagram and stuff, but I always shy away from it. And it's silly because if I was ever talking to a friend who was in this position, I'd be like pushing them, like, put yourself front and center, because it resonates and we see it works. But yeah, I do shy away from it, but I try and build Monk intentionally, so that, we have optionality in the future and it's not too tied to myself.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, it's a key business risk otherwise, for sure. So you raised more than 50 angels, which we've discussed the challenge of actually pitching to and corralling 50 angels, and then also a crowd round. Like that becomes a bit of an operational challenge. Like, how do you handle investor communications without it being a full-time job?
So I think I've always done this fairly well because someone drilled into me in the early days, just feel like you over communicate. And so what I started doing is I would send monthly updates by email. Then they switched to bi-monthly, and now we do quarterly because otherwise it becomes too much of a burden trying to update everyone. So I do that, and I check in with some of our larger investors or our board on a slightly like more ongoing basis. But otherwise, everyone seems pretty happy with that. I don't get a huge amount of questions from anyone. I think maybe I've been really lucky with the investors I have. But I think because there's always that continuous update from me, I like to think that they're fairly trusting and they know it's in good hands. But yeah, I think it's always best as long as you've kept people up to date, even if you have to deliver bad news. If they've had 10 positive updates before that, it's it's the realities of a business. There's always going to be things that don't go to plan. But yeah, I think just communication is key. Um, we've never actually had like a proper in-person investor event, which I would really love to do, almost, a bit of a party as well as a good update and hands-on session. Um, yeah, I don't know whether that's reflective of other people's experience, but that's been mine.
I would recommend in-person investor events highly. There's always
Yeah.
some incredible stuff that comes out of them, for sure.
Mm.
Um, we actually do them monthly at this other,
Oh, do
but
you?
yeah, bit mad, but it
Oh,
works
that's
well.
great. You have like a physical office space, right?
Yeah, we're based out of a converted water tower in Eltham Castle, so that helps.
Ah, very cool.
Um, so tell me about a little bit more about the fundraising journey. So you raised 2.8 in a male-dominated landscape. You touched on the underrepresentation of female founders. Is there a specific moment in the process you can point to where a male founder might not have experienced the same reception?
Yeah, there must be quite a few. So I remember I was over in the US, and a couple of friends who have a brand in a similar space had introduced me to a number of their investors. And one guy in particular wanted to go for dinner to talk about Monk. And I just had a feeling. I was like, guys, I don't know. This just feels a bit weird. They were like, no, you don't understand. This is just how the billionaires in America operate. This is just what they do. Like, you go have dinner, talk, whatever. Anyway, I went along, and he just clearly wanted a date. It wasn't really about the business. And at the time, we had next to no money in the bank account. I was in the US. I couldn't afford a hotel. And honestly, Jamie, I remember him saying like, "Oh, let me know where you want to drop off. I'll just like program the Uber to go there." And I was like, "Oh, just take me to LAX to the airport." And he was like, "No, you need to put the actual hotel in because it's really far away." And I was just like, "Okay, panic. Like, I just need to make up the name of a hotel."
Yeah.
And I just got to the point. I was like, "I'm going to sleep on the floor of an airport because I can't afford a hotel, despite the fact that I've just been out with." A billionaire who said he wanted to invest in my company. And I think some people don't realize that the risk as a founder, it's not just people talk about risk, and VCs, it's financial risk, right? And often it's not even their own money. Founder risk is asymmetric. When VCs invest in startups, they're talking about financial risk, and usually it's not their own money, but actually founder risk is it's rarely acknowledged. It's not just personal finances, but it's also physical well-being and reputation and future employability and dignity and comfort when you can't afford a hotel.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely been times when I feel like I have put myself in positions like that where I thought the upside is worth the risk. And yeah, I don't think I would have been treated like that if I were a male.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's acceleration of the risks that are already there, and it's an impressive journey you've been through.
Yeah. But
Um,
also I don't want to just be negative and just say like, oh, no money goes to female founders, because it does, but also I want to be part of the solution. So I really worked hard to find some female investors as well. And there are some brilliant like angel syndicates and networks in the UK. One called Alma Angels. I actually found quite a few of my female investors through them. And yeah, I can't wait for the day where I can start writing checks into to other businesses.
awesome. When you do write checks in other businesses, what kind of things will you look for?
Oh, this is interesting. So, one of the things that I will be adamant about is that company has a pool to put to the founder's health. So, one of the
Oh,
things I found, this is a really rogue scenario, but I got hit by one of those Lime bikes, the scooters on a
yeah.
pavement, and I went flying, and just the crack of my head hitting the floor was horrible. And I had a bit of concussion. I was really injured for a little while. And at the time, this is back when we didn't really have money. What I really needed was some hyperbaric oxygen therapy, because when a business is solely reliant on one or two founders making good quality long-term decisions, supporting their health isn't just a perk. It's actually it's risk. So if I invest into a company, I want to make sure that there is some sort of pool that can go to founders each month, because it's not just if something like that happens, but you need people to be exercising well. I would want people to go and have their bloods done and just make sure they're performing at the top of their game, because so much of it is just reliant on the founder's health. And I think that's something that's really overlooked.
Yeah, we're starting to see trends of VCs investing in physical and mental health of their founders because, that alongside co-founder breakup are
Mm.
among the biggest risks or the biggest risks to start.
Yeah, I didn't realize that VCs were already doing that. I love that.
Not in great numbers, but and it makes sense, right? Let's talk wellness industry generally. So there is a little bit of a credibility problem, right? So there's, a lot of expensive products making claims that science doesn't back up. But, cold water does have genuine evidence behind it. But how do you avoid getting tarred with that same brush?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we've spent a lot of time putting together some really good blog posts that directly tie to all of the studies. They're very scientifically backed. And actually it's interesting because they pull in quite a lot of traffic for us. They've worked really well. We've always made an effort to be pretty science backed where we can. Longer term, I would love to have a scientific advisory board. That would be really important to me. And also, why we integrate with the wearables is because we want to prove through data at scale that this is a practice worth everyone's attention. Because there's more and more research coming out about the cold, which is amazing as it grows in popularity. And we want to help facilitate that. And I was so happy because one of the leading scientists or researchers who's published most of or at least contributed to a lot of the volume of papers out there, actually reached out to us because he wanted to access our data. And he actually referenced the blog post. He was like, I was so happy to see that they were so well written. And I was like, thank God, because we were talking about most of his research. So at least we hadn't completely butchered it. But yeah, I think for us going forward, that will continue to be quite a big part.
Are you going to send him a nice bath?
Do you know what? No, you haven't, because we ran out of stock. So once we get off him, maybe actually, thank you for that nudge, because I'll reach back out to him.
Look, let's look even bigger. Like, where is Monk going to be in 5 years, and what is the biggest risk to where you want to go?
In 5 years, I think cold exposure is going to be as normalized as meditation is today. Like 10 years ago, meditation was seen as something weird reserved for hippies. And actually, I think in 5 years' time, cold exposure is going to be as normal as, you do it on your lunch break rather than reaching for that second or third coffee. And I really want Monk to be the world leaders in that space. I think the industry is becoming very commoditized, the lower level entry area. But I think, there's absolutely room for Monk, a more premium offering that really guides you to it. I think someone called us the Peloton of cold water therapy, which can go either way because, some people say, well, Peloton didn't do too well. But I think ultimately, even if we build a £3 billion business, I'll be pretty happy.
Awesome. Well, you are having stock issues, but it's the other kind of stock issues. Sold out, sold out, not overstocked. What do you see as the biggest risk to getting to where you want to go?
I think the biggest risk is probably someone very well capitalized coming into the space. I know there's a lot of really big companies who have done amazing things in, sauna, hot tubs, adjacent categories who really want to move in here, which is also an opportunity. So we have been approached by some for potential acquisition or partnership. So there's some strategic options there, but that is also a risk.
Yeah, and that's kind of, we talked briefly about your move into the States. That's kind of the issue there, right? There are incumbents, there are people at scale. So how are you looking at your US go-to-market?
Well, we've actually got a couple of really interesting options there. And one is a more strategic option, which would allow us to scale throughout the US very, very quickly. So that's very appealing because I think what we don't want to do is go there directly ourselves and just try and compete with some of these huge companies head to head on their turf, because especially D2C, like you could just spend an incredible amount of money in and it goes nowhere. So we're definitely looking at it as a strategic partnership is the way forward. So yeah, I'm excited to see where that nets out. We hadn't actually planned to go until early next year, but we also have received an LOI from a US distributor. I don't think they're the right fit, but it's just exciting to see how it could. We've got many options there, but it's just not getting excited and jumping at it before we're really ready for it.
And if you're out of stock now, how on earth do you make sure you're not out of stock if you scale across the US?
Well, yeah, good question. And I think that's where an interesting strategic partnership could come in, particularly if they have the ability to produce a product. Because that's the difficulty with hardware, right? It's just the working capital is always going to be a big challenge.
Yeah, totally. We talked a little bit, we were on a panel together recently, and AEO, or large language model searching, came up a lot. And Monk already seems well positioned in that space with your brand. But what are you doing to further optimize and make sure you stay ahead of the new search game?
That's something I'm exploring at the moment. And actually, at that event, I met a really interesting guy who has a product related to that. So it's not something we're actively pushing like right now, but I'm trying to figure out the right path forward because I know it's going to be so impactful and needed. But yeah, we're in the early stages of just trying to figure that out.
Had some experts on the podcast. And
In that case, I'll listen to those episodes.
Yeah, we had Sal Mohammed on, who's seven in that space.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, so just moving ahead, like, what is your most controversial prediction for the future of retail?
Oof. I think I touched on it earlier. Physical retail is going to become more important, not less. And yeah, stores that simply display products without being able to experience them, I think we'll see a slow death.
Okay, online only will not work for the long run.
Nope.
Okay, like it. And what's your craziest story? I mean, you've already told us a couple of absolutely wild stories, but apart from those, what is your craziest story working in retail thus far?
I think we've had some moments where we're setting up events that are in more conference spaces. It doesn't necessarily feel that experiential. And we've been thinking, is anyone actually going to get in these ice baths? Like, should we even fill them with water? And then suddenly you've got a queue of people there in little Speedos stripping off into their boxes, just wanting to plunge. And I think that flip from, I guess, doubt to demand happens really fast when the experience is right.
So the surprising thing is that people in suits are often wearing Speedos underneath.
Yes,
Yeah.
leopard print Speedos.
Laura Fullerton, thanks for coming on the Retail is Detail podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's it for today's episode of the Retail is Detail podcast. This episode was brought to you by Loxa, the Klarna for insurance, helping protect every retail customer everywhere. We help retailers offer product protection seamlessly on all major platforms, online and in store, across all insurable categories. Visit loxacover.com to find out more. You can catch previous episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, or at retailisdetailpodcast.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram to get insights from the podcast every day. I've been your host, Jamie Hamer. Thank you for listening, and see you next week.